A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm so glad you're with us on the program today, as we are going to be highlighting some of the races to watch on Election Day. By the way, this episode brought to you by Direct Bullion USA, the new gold standard of gold and silver dealers. You wouldn't let the swamp of Washington, D.C. take your guns, so why would you let them take your retirement? Visit directbullionusa.com today and start learning how to protect your financial freedom by requesting a free investment guide. Secure, protect, and diversify. Get started now at directbullionusa.com. All right, so let's focus on some of the races to watch tomorrow around the country. We've been writing at Bearing Arms about it, the pre-election spin that we've been hearing from gun control groups and anti-gun activists like Peter Ambler of Giffords, who insist that this election is going to prove that it's okay for Democrats to talk about gun control. Noting that there doesn't appear to be a single race where gun control specifically is going to cost Democrats an election. That's the caveat that Peter Ambler says, well, there's not one race where gun control is going to be the issue. Well, no, not an election year when the issue is inflation and the economy, and to a slightly lesser degree, crime and public safety. No, gun control may not be an issue that solely costs Democrats an election. However, support for the Second Amendment isn't likely to cost Republicans any seats either. In fact, quite the opposite, because it does look like it's going to be a good night for the GOP across the board. And we're going to talk about some governor's races and some Senate races to keep an eye on. But one race in particular that is of great importance for gun owners is Measure 114 in Oregon. This is the ballot initiative that would do a number of things. It would impose a magazine ban in Oregon. Now, those individuals who lawfully possess a magazine at the moment would be supposedly grandfathered in, but under very limited circumstances. Basically, you could take your magazine with you to the range, but you couldn't, use a 17-round magazine in self-defense. I don't even think, even if you had limited the magazine, the number of rounds in that magazine to 10, I think that would still be illegal for you to possess that quote unquote large capacity magazine in public. In addition to the magazine ban, which again creates a new nonviolent possessory offense rather than directing police to focus on violent criminals, Measure 114 would also impose a permit to purchase system that would further burden law enforcement with tens of millions of dollars in unfunded mandates. That, by the way, according to analysis from the Secretary of State's office in Oregon, that this would bring in approximately $20 million in new revenue, quote unquote, taxes and fees paid to exercise a constitutionally protected right. But it would cost law enforcement across the state about $50 million each and every year. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge gap in funding. And ultimately, this amounts to a defund the police initiative by forcing them to redirect funds away from investigating violent crimes, away from putting officers on the street, and instead forces them to redirect that spending towards administrative efforts that are aimed exclusively at people who want to obey the law, law-abiding legal gun owners. It's absolutely absurd. Now, what's interesting here is we've only had a couple of polls out in Oregon. Both of them are a couple of weeks old at this point. The Oregonian was first out. They had a poll in late September showing 51% support for Measure 114, 39% opposed, the remainder undecided. So majority support, but narrow majority support, and within the margin of error. A few weeks later, Emerson came out with a poll, and they found opposition to 114 now narrowly leading support. 43% of Oregon respondents said that they were opposed to Measure 114. 41% said they were in support, and another 17% undecided. They also can look at the breakdown here. 13% of Democrats in that Emerson poll said that they're voting against Measure 114. Another 19% say that they are currently undecided. That is larger than the share of undecided independents, larger than the share of undecided Republicans. Democrats, 2/3 of them anyway, still say they plan on voting for Measure 114. 34% of independents say the same, and just 13% of Republicans say they plan on voting for Oregon Measure 114. Now, given the leftward tilt of the state, that means this is going to be a very, very close race. Nowhere near the 60, 70, 80, 97% support that gun control activists claim to have from the public when it comes to their supposedly common sense gun safety measures, right? This one might not even get across the finish line. And if that happens, if Measure 114 goes down to defeat in Oregon, it's going to be because of an unlikely coalition of opposition from across the political spectrum. You've got folks on the right and on the left, too, in smaller numbers, but they're still there, and they're pretty vocal, who are speaking out against the consequences, both intended and unintended, of Measure 114. And I will be watching very closely to see not only what the numbers look like in rural Oregon, where I expect we're going to see a pretty strong turnout, in part because Measure 114 is on the ballot, but I want to see what happens in Multnomah County, where I expect this measure to pass, but can those pro-gun progressives bring the margins down enough in Multnomah and the suburban Portland counties to ultimately send Measure 114 to defeat? I think it is a distinct possibility. I mean, look, given Oregon's politics, you'd have to say that Measure 114 is favored to win, but I would not be surprised at all if, in fact, this really draconian gun control initiative goes down to defeat on Election Day. And if it doesn't, well, I think most of the measures are going to go down in court, which, frankly, is another reason to vote against Measure 114. But I'm going to be keeping a close eye on that. We probably won't start to see the numbers come in until late Tuesday night, given that this is a West Coast election. The other ballot initiative for gun owners is in Iowa, where there's an amendment to the state constitution that would enshrine the right to keep and bear arms in that document, as well as specify to the courts that strict scrutiny is the proper lens to use when considering the constitutionality of gun control laws. This, I think, is going to pass handily. By the way, I don't think there's much of a chance of this going down to defeat. The papers, the state's biggest newspapers have come out in opposition. You've even seen school boards in Lynn County come out and oppose this constitutional amendment. But the scant public polling that we have seen indicates that more than 60% of Iowa voters say they're in favor of this measure. If you want to look at the Iowa governor's race as a potential proxy, Governor Kim Reynolds seems to be running away with her reelection campaign. So I think it's going to be a good night for Republicans and conservatives in Iowa. And that means I think it's going to be a good night for gun owners as well. You know, listen, I wish both political parties respected our right to keep and bear arms, and I'm glad to see work on the left in that regard. But our progressive gun owning friends have a way to go right now. And generally speaking, you know, one party is hostile to our right to keep and bear arms. One party respects it. And I think voters in Iowa are going to send a clear message in support of their right to keep and bear arms when it comes to enshrining that right in their state constitution on Tuesday. Now, some of the other races that we are keeping an eye on are a little, maybe a little bit of a stretch. New York, for example, where Democrats outnumber Republicans by more than 2-1. Unaffiliated voters help Republicans make up the difference, at least theoretically, but Democrats start with a huge numerical advantage in any statewide election. And that would include the governor's race, where the latest Real Clear Politics average has Kathy Hochul up by just about 4 points over Republican Lee Zeldin. Now, keep in mind, 4 years ago, Andrew Cuomo won re-election by 22 points in New York. So even if this swing is accurate, and let's say Kathy Hochul wins by 4, That's an 18-point swing in favor of the Republicans. And that will translate, I believe, into some pickups, not only in the state legislature in New York, but even in the heavily gerrymandered congressional districts in New York State, where Republicans could pick up 1 or 2 seats that they were not expected to win, given the strong turnout in New York. So I think Zeldin has a chance, by the way, to pull this off. 4 points again, either right at or within the margin of error. There have been some polls that actually show Lee Zeldin with a narrow lead over Kathy Hochul. But look for the lack of coattails for Hochul in New York State. And again, that could mean some surprises. I don't think it's going to be enough to take back control of the state assembly in New York. I don't think it's going to be enough to flip a majority of New York's congressional delegations from blue to red. But I do think we are going to see some gains in New York in some unexpected places. And again, the possibility of the upset of the century with Lee Zeldin unseating Kathy Hochul, that remains on the table this election cycle. Texas, man, Greg Abbott's just running away with it. Not even close. A 9-point lead in the Real Clear Politics polling average for Greg Abbott over Robert Francis O'Rourke. And you can see the last couple of polls there have actually shown Abbott gaining more ground on O'Rourke, already again up by nearly double digits in the Real Clear Politics polling average. O'Rourke, of course, has run a campaign all over the place when it comes to gun control. He announced his candidacy for governor by saying, "Oh, never mind about that coming for your gun stuff. I don't mean it." And then we saw the unspeakable tragedy at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, and Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke turned on a dime and said, "Actually, no, I do want to come after your guns." Well, all that stuff I said a couple months ago, yeah, forget that. Now I do want to come for your guns. And then he modified that again to, "I'd like to come from for your guns, but I don't think I'm going to have the votes to do it. So if you elect me, I won't come for your guns, even though I want to. Instead, I'll try to raise the age to purchase a semi-automatic firearm from 18 to 21, and a couple of other, again, reasonable gun safety measures." None of those campaign arguments have worked for Robert Francis O'Rourke, who has trailed Abbott in every single poll in the Texas governor's race that's been conducted over the course of this campaign. So I expect that Abbott is going to win this one, running away with it, quite frankly. And the gun control advocates, look, they will have their excuses. But the bottom line is a governor who signed constitutional carry into law is likely to actually win in Texas by a larger margin than he did 4 years ago, despite the Democrat trying to make one of the basis of his campaigns the need for more gun control laws. And Texas is not the only state where that dynamic is in play. We're watching the same thing play out in Georgia as well. Governor Brian Kemp doesn't have quite the lead that Greg Abbott does in Texas in the Real Clear Politics average. He's up by about 7, almost 8 points over Stacey Abrams. But again, you can see the trends there in the last few days show as there are fewer undecideds. Abrams has seen a slight tick up in her polling, but nowhere near what it was even a month ago. People seem to be coming home to Brian Kemp in Georgia. And again, Stacey Abrams has tried to make gun control one of the centerpieces of her campaign. She has excoriated Kemp for signing constitutional carry into law. She bemoaned the fact that Kemp has the support of the vast majority of the state sheriffs, charging, again, basically every sheriff's office in Georgia with being a racist law enforcement entity. And even though she says she's concerned about the racist impact of law enforcement, what does Stacey Abrams want to do? Empower law enforcement to make more arrests, empower prosecutors to charge more people for nonviolent possessory offenses that she would turn from a right into a crime. And again, that doesn't seem to be paying any sort of electoral benefit to her in Georgia whatsoever. As she has made her attacks on Kemp's record on the Second Amendment more pointed, again, she's seen her numbers decline. So those are a couple of governor's races to keep an eye on. Obviously, there are some other important ones as well. Ohio, Mike DeWine, same phenomena as we're seeing in Texas and Georgia. signed constitutional carry. Hasn't hurt him a bit in the polls. He's likely to beat Nan Whaley by 15 points or more come Tuesday night. And it looks like J.D. Vance is pulling ahead of Tim Ryan in the Ohio Senate race, according to the Real Clear Politics polling average. He enjoys a lead, a growing lead. Still not going to be a blowout. And Ryan has also turned to guns in desperation, although in this case, Tim Ryan's cutting campaign ads showing him shooting. Not well, but shooting, and then walking up afterwards saying, not bad for a Democrat. So Ryan's not out there running on the O'Rourke, Abrams, Hochul campaign playbook of let's ban our way to safety. That's not what he's doing. He's actually, I'm one of you. If you elect me, I won't be that 51st vote for gun control. If you elect me, I'll buck Chuck Schumer. I'll buck Nancy Pelosi. I'll buck the Democratic leadership. And I don't think many Ohioans are buying it. Now, we will see some ticket splitting. I think that Governor DeWine is going to win with a much wider margin than J.D. Vance is in Ohio. But I think J.D. Vance is going to pull it out, too. And I think ultimately it's not going to be particularly close in the Buckeye State. A couple of other Senate races, however, I think could be nail-biters, including in Arizona, where the race between incumbent Mark Kelly, co-founder of the gun control group Giffords, along with his wife Gabrielle Giffords, and Blake Masters, who talks about building quote-unquote ghost guns in his garage, that race is neck and neck. And again, Blake Masters has really been surging in the last week or so of the campaign. You can see throughout most of the fall, Kelly enjoyed a 5-6 point lead in public polling. But then starting about mid-October or so, that race really started narrowing. And at first it was declining numbers for Kelly without necessarily a rise in support for Blake Masters. But over the past couple of weeks, as you can see in the polling, there is an indication that not only is Kelly losing some ground, but Masters has been gaining ground. And right now, the Real Clear Politics average has Kelly up by just a point. There have been some polls that have it tied. There have been some polls that have Mark Kelly up with a small lead. There have been some polls that have Blake Master up with a small lead. This one really is too close to call. But again, if you're Democrats, it shouldn't be. You've got an incumbent. And by the way, if you are a gun control activist like Peter Ambler, who says this is the year that it's safe to talk about gun control if you're a Democrat. Candidates across the country are demonstrating this. Why is Mark Kelly not talking about gun control? Because he's not talking about gun control. It's not listed on his campaign website. It's not. It wasn't part of his debate material. I have yet to see Mark Kelly release any sort of campaign flyer going after Blake Masters for his support for the Second Amendment. Mark Kelly doesn't want to talk about gun control this election, even though the executive director of his gun control group says it's safe for Democrats to do so. Another nail-biter Senate race is shaping up in New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan, again, enjoyed a pretty big lead throughout the fall. You can see that back in August, September, she was looking at like a 9-point lead in the Real Clear Politics polling average. And then as voters started to pay attention, that race started narrowing, and over the past couple of weeks, it truly has become neck and neck. Don Baldock tying Maggie Hassan in some polls, a 1 or 2 point lead. In other polls right now, Maggie Hassan with a 1 point lead in the Real Clear Politics polling average. This was supposed to be a safe seat for Democrats. In fact, Democrats ended up spending money supporting Don Baldock's primary campaign because they thought that he was going to be a weaker candidate. And here it is, the day before elections, and Maggie Hassan is not in the driver's seat right now. And Don Baldock very well could pull off this upset. And I think that if that happens, again, is gun control going to be the difference maker? Is that going to be the number one issue for voters in New Hampshire? No, it won't be. But Maggie Hassan's support for gun control, I don't believe is going to help her at all. You look at Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire. He's running for re-election. I didn't even bother pulling the numbers because he is so far ahead. Sununu, again, author of, not author, but he signed constitutional carry into law as governor. Doesn't appear to be hurting him with Granite State voters. And Maggie Hassan's support for gun control doesn't seem to be doing her any favors with those same voters in New Hampshire. Don Baldock supporting the Second Amendment. I think it's an easier fit for a lot of New Hampshire voters to say, all right, we're going with the guy who at least isn't going to try to take my Second Amendment rights away. Now, again, each and every race that we've talked, I won't say each and every race that we've talked about is close enough that it could go one way or the other. I would eat my hat if Greg Abbott loses tomorrow night. I will eat my hat if Mike DeWine loses tomorrow night. Those races, I think, are outside of the margin of error. Brian Kemp, same thing. I think he's in good shape tomorrow night. But there are so many races across the country that are so close right now. We really can't afford as gun owners to take any of them for granted. So wherever you live, no matter what race is on your ballot, I hope that you get out and vote, and you vote like your rights depend on it, because they do. Gun control groups like Everytown are spending not only on gubernatorial races, U.S. Senate campaigns, they're going after county sheriffs. They're spending on Secretary of State elections, even though that position has nothing to do with gun control. They are flush with cash, and they are spending it from coast to coast on candidates that view your right to keep and bear arms as a constitutional wrong that must be corrected. And we do have the opportunity to send a message, again, from sea to shining sea on Election Day, that our rights will not be taken for granted. They will not be turned into criminal offenses. And we will show up at the ballot box to defend our most fundamental freedoms. So we will be paying more attention to Election Day on tomorrow's Bearing Arms Cam and Company. And, of course, on the website Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, we will get you caught up on all of the races that are so critically important to gun owners. I should mention as well, state legislative races. We didn't even talk about this, but I did write about this briefly at Bearing Arms last week. North Carolina, you are a handful of seats away from a veto-proof majority. Even if you've got a Democratic governor, Republicans, I think, are 3 House seats, 2 state Senate seats away from a veto-proof majority. So they could repeal things like North Carolina's permit to purchase law and not have to worry about Governor Roy Cooper keeping that Jim Crow era relic on the books. There are a number of other states where the prospect of a veto-proof majority is tantalizingly close. Pennsylvania is one of them. And there are, again, some other races out there that we haven't talked about that I think are still in upset territory. New Mexico's governor's race, Michelle Lujan Grisham up by 4 points in the Real Clear Politics polling average. Mark Ronchetti, a Republican opponent, though has led in a couple of late polls. Again, I think we live in roughly a 50-50 country. And I think while the lion's share of these races are going to be decided in Republicans' favor, that's not going to be the case for everyone. There will be some anti-gun Democrats who eke out a victory. I just think that it will be a case of eking out a victory in many cases. I don't think you're going to see Kathy Hochul win New York by 22 points like Andrew Cuomo did 4 years ago. I don't think you're going to see Michelle Lujan Grisham win New Mexico running away by, I think it was 8 points she won by in 2018, 14 points in 2018. Real Clear Politics average has her up now by 4. So if these pre-election polls are anywhere close to accurate, we're looking at somewhere between, let's say, an 8 to 18 point swing, depending on what state or what race you're looking at, in favor of Republicans. That puts this in red wave territory. Unless the pre-election polling is just completely wrong, all of these outfits have got it wrong, and they've all got it wrong in one direction. I think tomorrow night is going to be a pretty good night for Republicans, but we can make sure that our Second Amendment rights are secure, again, by showing up at the ballot box and voting on Election Day if you haven't already done so. Now, turning our attention to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. Let's start there with a story out of Illinois. J.B. Pritzker likely to win re-election tomorrow, and that is a shame because the Democratic dominance of Illinois politics has not only led to a deprivation of our right to keep and bear arms. We've got so many lawsuits going on in Illinois right now. It's silly. But you also have this, again, soft on crime attitude. The Safety Act is getting ready to go into effect in Illinois. Going to end cash bail for a lot of offenses. But even if you get convicted, you gotta, you can't be assured you're going to prison. These soft on crime policies in Illinois are already in place, as we see in today's recidivist report, where a Lake Villa man has been sentenced to periodic imprisonment after pleading guilty in a case where he robbed a man while armed with a gun in Round Lake and then attacked the victim, 22-year-old Keenan Queen of Lake Villa, indicted by a grand jury in April on charges of armed robbery, which is a Class X felony, aggravated robbery, which is a Class 1 felony, and then 2 counts of aggravated battery, which is a Class 2 felony. Grand jury indictment said that Queen robbed a man last August while armed with a firearm, taking a phone, cash, prescription glasses from the 19-year-old man. He also struck the victim in the head with an object, don't know what it is, described, but caused bodily harm to the victim in this case. So Queen ends up pleading guilty last month to 1 count of robbery. All the other charges are dismissed. Yeah. Not even armed robbery, just robbery. Lake County judge signs off on the plea deal and then sentenced Queen to 36 months of probation and 12 months of, quote, periodic imprisonment. Yeah. Here's the thing. This is not the first run-in with the law for Mr. Queen. A month after Queen allegedly conducted this armed robbery, Queen was charged with drug-induced homicide for allegedly selling pills that were laced with fentanyl to a man who then subsequently overdosed and died. That case was recently closed after Queen also entered into a plea agreement and pleaded guilty to an amended count of unlawful delivery of a controlled substance, which is a Class 2 felony, in exchange for his drug-induced homicide charge being dismissed. And another judge sentenced Queen last week to 36 months of probation and 100 hours of community service, fined him about $2,800 for selling a fentanyl-laced pill that killed a man. 2 weeks, 2 plea deals, 2 very serious crimes, and 2 judges letting Keenan Queen off the hook. By the way, terrible, terrible name. If I were Mr. Queen, I might be blaming my criminal productivity on the fact that my parents named me Keenan Queen, which sounds a lot like King and Queen, but whatever. No excuse. And no excuse again for the judge's decisions. Taking somebody accused of serious violent crimes and delivering them a slap on the wrist. And again, unfortunately, based on the likely outcome in Illinois, we are probably going to be seeing a lot more of these types of headlines in the state going forward. Today's armed citizen story, St. Paul, Minnesota, where police say a man arrested in a shooting will not be facing murder charges because they believe that this was, in actuality, a case of self-defense. DeAndre Buckner of St. Paul died last Tuesday. Police arrested a 22-year-old or a 20-year-old man at the scene, but the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, quote, declined to file charges due to facts uncovered in the police investigation that strongly support a self-defense and defense of others claim by the person who fired the fatal shot. Last Tuesday, just before the shooting took place, somebody called 911. It was just after 10 p.m. and reported that there were people with guns outside of their home. In a statement on Wednesday, the police department said within 30 seconds of the 911 call, the caller stated that shots were fired. Police found Buckner shot in front of the home. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Police department has not released additional information about the circumstances. And last Friday, police spokesman said that the case remains under investigation. But again, prosecutors have decided that they will not be filing charges here. We don't know all of the specifics, but it sounds like people showed up outside of the house armed, threatened the occupants inside the house, and one of the occupants fired in self-defense and in defense of others. We don't know if he fired the first shot or if he was responding to a gunfire. But we do know, again, according to prosecutors, that they don't think this was anything but a case of self-defense. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. A police officer in Kansas City, Missouri, who was able to help an infant who was struggling to breathe. Officer Richard Deshane and his partner Charles Owen got a call about a 1-month-old girl who wasn't breathing. They got there before EMS did. And so the pair ran inside the home. Father of the baby handed the child to Deshane, who started performing infant chest compressions on the girl. And she quickly began breathing again. He then turned the girl on her side. Owen attempted to locate obstructions. Body cam of this apparently is going to be released today. But the good news is the baby is okay, thanks to the fast response. And again, the quick actions of Officer Deshane and Charles Owens there in Kansas City, Missouri. Now, that is all the time we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program. And again, remind you, encourage you, extort you, not extort, but to exhort you. That's the word I was looking for. To go and vote if you haven't done so already. Again, we'll have more on the midterms coming up on Tuesday's Bearing Arms Cam & Company. But in the meantime, be sure to check out bearingarms.com. We're updating the website throughout the day with all of the information you need to know about your right to keep and bear arms. And if you like what you see, I'd always encourage you to become a VIP member as well. Just go to bearingarms.com/subscribe. Use the promo code GUNRIGHTS, and you can get a significant savings on your VIP membership. Not only will you be supporting the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism we do at Bearing Arms, but as our way of saying thanks for showing your support, we're going to give you exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. News stories and analysis that matter, because your support does matter as well. We really do appreciate it. Have a great rest of your Monday. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.